Juliet always believed that monsters lived under the bed, but the real monster lived in her kitchen and called itself her mother. And on the morning her life shattered, she realized the world never warns you before it breaks you. It just happens, like a quiet storm that suddenly tears the whole sky apart. Juliet stood barefoot on the cold wooden floor while her mother screamed her name like it was some kind of crime to exist. And the sound echoed through the house like an alarm no one could turn off. Juliet was 17, gentle, honest, soft-hearted. But life had carved scars in her that no one could see because she had learned to hide them behind a quiet smile. She never asked for too much. Only one thing, a little kindness, and maybe a little space to breathe. But her mother treated kindness like it was some forbidden treasure she had sworn never to give. Juliet, her father Daniel, was the only warm place she had in this cold world. Every night he came home, tired yet smiling, bringing her leftover fries from work, telling her she deserved the whole world, telling her he believed in her, telling her she mattered. But lately, even he was changing, coming home later, talking less, breathing heavier, like the house itself was draining the life out of him. On that morning, Juliet woke to the sound of drawers slamming, her mother yelling, "Why can't you do anything right? Why are you always the problem?" And Juliet just stood there, still, quiet, heart pounding, but face calm. Because this was her rule. Survive by silence, breathe without noise, exist without asking for anything. Daniel walked in, rubbing his eyes, looking at Juliet first, always at Juliet, as if checking she was still standing, still, whole, still his little girl. He whispered, "It's okay, kiddo," and touched her shoulder gently. But her mother snapped. "Look at you, protecting her again. This girl ruins everything." Juliet felt the words hit her like stones, but she stayed frozen because crying only made things worse. Daniel sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that sounds like a goodbye, and said, "I can't do this today." He took his coat, his keys, his phone. Juliet's heart dropped. She rushed after him, barefoot, calling, "Dad, please wait." Her voice cracked like thin glass. Daniel stopped at the door, turned back, his eyes full of guilt, pain, regret, all mixed together. He whispered, "I'm sorry, kiddo." Then he stepped outside, closed the door, and the sound was so final, it felt like the universe shutting Juliet out forever. Her mother laughed behind her, a cold, sharp laugh, like victory. And Juliet knew in that moment she had no one left, no shield, no safe place, only herself. And the fire quietly rising inside her, telling her to stand up, to fight, to become more than what this house wanted her to be. That morning was the beginning of the girl the world would one day fear and admire, the morning Juliet swore she would never break again. Juliet sat on the edge of her bed that afternoon, staring at the wall like it was the only thing in the world that didn't leave her. And the silence in the house felt heavier than any scream her mother had ever thrown at her. She kept replaying the sound of the door closing behind her father, replaying that final whisper, "I'm sorry, kiddo," as if sorry could stitch the hole it left in her chest. Juliet had always believed that people leave only when they no longer love you, but now she wondered if people sometimes leave because loving you hurts them too much. And thinking that made her feel smaller than she had ever felt. Her mother walked past her room humming as if she had won something, and Juliet felt that quiet fire inside her grow hotter because she finally understood the truth. Her mother wasn't cruel for a reason. Cruelty was her nature, and love was something Juliet would have to learn on her own. Juliet went downstairs to the kitchen, the same place where her mother had broken her heart every morning. And she saw the dining table still messy from the fight, crumbs scattered, a broken cup on the floor. The house looked like her mother treated it, the same way she treated Juliet, disposable and unloved. Juliet bent down, picked up the pieces one by one, her fingers shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of everything she had been carrying alone. A thin cut on her finger made a small line of red appear, but she didn't flinch. She just stared at it, feeling nothing and everything at the same time. Her mother walked in, hair tied back, lips cold, eyes sharper than knives, and said, "Why are you always like this, Juliet? Why can't you be normal?" Juliet's hands slowly stopped moving. She stood up straight, looked at her mother for the first time without dropping her gaze, and that tiny act felt like lifting a mountain. Her mother stared at her as if shocked. "How dare you look at me like that?" Juliet took a breath, deep, steady, and her voice finally came out. Not loud, not angry, just honest. "I am tired." And those 3 words hit the room like thunder. Her mother narrowed her eyes. "Tired of what? Tired of living in this house? You think you have it hard?" Juliet wanted to scream yes, but she swallowed it because she knew screaming never saved her before. Instead, she said quietly, "I am tired of being your target." Her mother's face twisted in disbelief, as if Juliet had broken a rule that was written into the walls. Juliet turned away, walked to the sink, washed her cut finger, and for the first time, she watched her own reflection in the window. Not the girl her mother kept calling useless, but someone who had survived every bruise, every word, every silent night, and was still standing. That realization felt like a small revolution inside her, a quiet rebellion beginning to breathe. She looked at her mother again, and this time there was no fear, only a calm she had never known. And her mother saw it too, saw something new in Juliet's eyes, something no amount of cruelty could erase. Juliet knew this was only the beginning of the girl who would never let herself be small again. The next morning, Juliet woke before the sun. The house felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather, but everything to do with the people inside it. She walked across the wooden floor, hearing the tired creaks that echoed the years of quiet suffering. She moved through the hallway, passing her mother's closed door, a door that had stayed shut more often than it opened, and the silence behind it felt heavier than any shouting. Juliet reached the kitchen and stopped the moment she saw the sink full of dishes. Her mother's plate always on top of hers, as if Juliet existed only to collect the weight of someone else's life. The overhead light flickered like it too had grown exhausted from shining on the same pain year after year. Juliet placed her hand on the counter, remembering how her father used to stand exactly there, making coffee, humming quietly, telling her she was stronger than she believed. But he never stayed long enough to help her understand that strength. He left her to discover it alone. She opened the window, the cold morning air brushing her face with a softness she had not felt in days. The smell of damp pavement drifting in, reminding her that the world outside was bigger than this kitchen, bigger than this house, bigger than the small space her mother tried to trap her inside. Juliet closed her eyes, breathing in the crisp air, letting it settle inside her like something healing, something real, something hers. Then she heard it, the slow, dragging footsteps that meant her mother had woken up. Juliet did not move. She kept her eyes on the outside world as her mother's presence filled the kitchen like a shadow. Her mother stood behind her, voice sharp even before the day had begun. "So, this is how you spend your morning," she said, her tone practiced in disappointment. Juliet stayed silent, a silence that always angered her mother. "Why did you not clean the kitchen? I told you last night, but you never listen. You never do anything right." Juliet still did not turn. She stared at the world beyond the window, a world that suddenly felt reachable. Her mother stepped closer, waiting for Juliet to shrink like always, But Juliet did not move, not today. Something inside her refused. Her mother scoffed, thinking she still held power over a girl who no longer existed. "You think ignoring me makes you brave. You think standing there means anything." Juliet turned her head, finally, slowly, her expression calm, her eyes tired but steady, years of swallowed hurt gathering behind them. She spoke quietly, yet her voice did not shake. "I carry the weight you pretend is mine, but it is yours, and I am tired of holding it. Your choices, your anger, your regrets, none of them are mine anymore." Her mother stared, stunned, like Juliet had spoken words she was never meant to hear. Juliet continued, "I am done absorbing your storms. I am done being the place where you throw everything you cannot face." Her mother stepped back, only an inch, but Juliet noticed it, that tiny shift, that tiny break in the wall that had held her down for years. And in that moment, Juliet felt something she had not felt in a long time. The beginning of freedom. Juliet sat on the moving bus, feeling the steady rhythm under her feet like a heartbeat she never knew she needed. The town kept drifting behind her, small houses fading into fields, fields fading into distance, and she watched it all without looking away, because for the first time, she wanted to see what she was leaving. She pressed her forehead gently against the window, feeling the cool glass grounding her thoughts, grounding her breath. She realized she was scared, not of running, but of what waiting might look like beyond this ride. Yet, even in that fear, she felt something soft growing inside her, something like courage, something she never allowed herself to name before. The bus slowed at a small station. People getting on, people getting off. The kind of flow she never belonged to, but now somehow fit into. A little boy climbed on, holding his backpack too big for his shoulders. His mother, tired but smiling, and Juliet felt something tighten in her chest. A memory of her younger self, waiting for someone to hold her hand and tell her she mattered. She blinked away the sting, not out of fear, but because she refused to let old wounds own her anymore. She turned her face toward the front, watching the road stretch open like a possibility she never thought she deserved. The driver, an older man with calm eyes, glanced at her through the mirror and said, "You heading somewhere special or running from somewhere?" Juliet hesitated, then answered softly, "Maybe both." He nodded like he had heard that answer 1,000 times and said, "Either way, kid, the road only goes forward." Juliet held his words inside her like a small light, warming the places that had been cold too long. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the envelope she found stuck behind the old bench in the park. She hadn't opened it before, too afraid it might hurt, too afraid it might matter. But now, on this moving bus, she tore it gently. Inside was a simple, folded paper, her father's handwriting, shaky, small, barely holding itself together. It read, "I'm sorry, I left, but I want you to know you never deserved the silence you lived in. You were the bravest part of my life." Juliet read the words again and again and again, until her hands shook, not with sadness, but with something else, something like release. She felt the years of carrying questions, the years of feeling unseen, the years of thinking his leaving meant she was unlovable, begin to crack apart like old ice in early spring. She folded the letter carefully, placing it close to her heart, not as a wound, but as a thread connecting her to the truth she always needed. The bus turned toward the highway, the world widening around her, and Juliet felt her widening too, like she finally had space to breathe, space to hope. She whispered into the moving air, "I am going forward," and for the first time, she believed it completely. She did not know where the bus would take her, not the town, not the future, not the people she might meet. But she knew this. She was no longer a girl trapped in a house. She was no longer a shadow in her own life. She was Juliet, and she was choosing her next step. The road stretched ahead, endless, open, honest, and Juliet let it lead her. Not out of fear, but out of finally knowing she deserved more than survival. She deserved her own beginning. Juliet walked farther from the house, letting the cold morning air settle into her chest like something new, something she had never been allowed to feel before. The feeling of choosing her own direction. She kept walking until the houses grew older and the road cracked under her shoes, and the world looked less polished, less controlled, and somehow more honest. She reached the small park where she used to sit with her father on rare evenings when he had time for her. They would sit on the old bench, the one that leaned slightly to the right, and he would tell her to look at the sky because clouds always move forward, even when they look heavy. Juliet sat on that same bench now, the wood rougher than she remembered, the paint peeling, the cold biting through her dress, but she did not move. She simply let herself sit, something she had never allowed herself to do without permission. She looked at the sky, remembering his quiet voice telling her she was strong. And suddenly she felt the ache of missing him. Not because he left, but because he was the only person who ever tried to see her, even if he failed in the end. Juliet whispered into the air, "I wish you stayed long enough to see who I became." She felt her chest tighten, but she did not cry. Not this time. Because the tears she used to shed were for survival. This silence now was for healing. She watched the sun rise higher, and with it came people walking their dogs, laughing, talking, living their ordinary mornings. And Juliet felt the weight of her own mourning settling into a place inside her that no longer hurt as sharply. She stood slowly, feeling grounded in a way she had never felt at home. She walked toward the small diner across the street, the one she passed every day but never entered because her mother always said it was a waste of money. Juliet stepped inside, the warm air smelling like coffee and syrup wrapped around her gently. An older woman behind the counter smiled, not the sharp, tight smile she grew up with, but a soft, real one. The woman asked, "First time here, sweetheart?" Juliet nodded, sitting at a booth by the window, the sunlight catching her hair. She ordered a simple breakfast, something she never got to choose freely at home. And when the plate arrived, warm and imperfect, she felt something shift inside her again. She realized she was tasting freedom in small bites. The woman refilled her cup without being asked, and Juliet felt tears threaten, but she blinked them back, not out of fear, but because she wanted to feel this moment fully. The woman asked, "You okay, honey?" Juliet answered quietly, "I think I am," for the first time. The woman nodded, like she understood, like she had seen girls like Juliet walk in before, girls carrying silence like armor. After breakfast, Juliet stepped outside, feeling stronger, not because her life was fixed, but because she finally believed she deserved a life that could be. She walked toward the bus stop, a bus pulling in, its doors opening with a soft hiss, inviting her forward. She thought of the house behind her, the kitchen, the cracked tiles, her mother's voice, her father's absence, her own years of shrinking herself to survive. Juliet stepped onto the bus, paid her fare, and sat by the window, watching the town pass by. And with every turn of the wheels, she felt the weight fall away, piece by piece, until all that remained was the quiet truth she finally belonged to herself. She was not escaping, she was choosing. And for the first time, that choice felt like the beginning of her real life. Juliet sat on the moving bus, feeling the steady rhythm under her feet like a heartbeat she never knew she needed. The town kept drifting behind her, small houses fading into fields, fields fading into distance, and she watched it all without looking away. Because for the first time, she wanted to see what she was leaving. She pressed her forehead gently against the window, feeling the cool glass grounding her thoughts, grounding her breath. She realized she was scared, not of running, but of what waiting might look like beyond this ride. Yet, even in that fear, she felt something soft growing inside her, something like courage, something she never allowed herself to name before. The bus slowed at a small station. People getting on, people getting off, the kind of flow she never belonged to, but now somehow fit into. A little boy climbed on, holding his backpack too big for his shoulders. His mother, tired but smiling, and Juliet felt something tighten in her chest. A memory of her younger self, waiting for someone to hold her hand and tell her she mattered. She blinked away the sting, not out of fear, but because she refused to let old wounds own her anymore. She turned her face toward the front, watching the road stretch open like a possibility she never thought she deserved. The driver, an older man with calm eyes, glanced at her through the mirror and said, "You heading somewhere special or running from somewhere?" Juliet hesitated, then answered softly, "Maybe both." He nodded like he had heard that answer 1,000 times and said, "Either way, kid, the road only goes forward." Juliet held his words inside her like a small light, warming the places that had been cold too long. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the envelope she found stuck behind the old bench in the park. She hadn't opened it before, too afraid it might hurt, too afraid it might matter. But now, on this moving bus, she tore it gently. Inside was a simple, folded paper. Her father's handwriting, shaky, small, barely holding itself together. It read, "I'm sorry, I left, but I want you to know you never deserved the silence you lived in. You were the bravest part of my life." Juliet read the words again and again and again until her hands shook, not with sadness, but with something else, something like release. She felt the years of carrying questions, the years of feeling unseen, the years of thinking his leaving meant she was unlovable, begin to crack apart like old ice in early spring. She folded the letter carefully, placing it close to her heart, not as a wound, but as a thread connecting her to the truth she always needed. The bus turned toward the highway, the world widening around her, and Juliet felt her widening too, like she finally had space to breathe, space to hope. She whispered into the moving air, "I am going forward," and for the first time, she believed it completely. She did not know where the bus would take her, not the town, not the future, not the people she might meet. But she knew this. She was no longer a girl trapped in a house. She was no longer a shadow in her own life. She was Juliet, and she was choosing her next step. The road stretched ahead, endless, open, honest, and Juliet let it lead her, not out of fear, but out of finally knowing she deserved more than survival. She deserved her own beginning. Juliet stepped off the bus into a small, quiet town where the air felt different, lighter in a way she could not describe. She walked slowly along the narrow road, hearing nothing but her footsteps and the distant hum of morning life. She did not know where she was going, but for the first time, the not knowing did not scare her. A woman standing outside a small bakery glanced at her with a gentle, curious look, the kind Juliet was never used to. A look that did not judge her clothes, her eyes, or the tired weight she carried. The woman asked softly, "You all right, honey?" And Juliet felt something inside her soften because no one had asked her that without expecting something in return. She nodded shyly, and the woman smiled, like she felt like warmth on cold skin. Inside the bakery, she sat down at a corner table, the smell of fresh bread reminding her of mornings she never really had. The woman placed a cup of warm tea in front of her, saying, "This one's on the house. You look like you needed a pause." Juliet stared at the steam rising from the cup, feeling an ache she had held for years loosening slowly. She whispered, "Thank you," and the woman nodded like she understood pain without needing an explanation. Juliet watched people come and go, ordinary people, laughing, arguing, holding hands, carrying groceries, and she realized something simple and powerful. Life was allowed to be ordinary. Life was allowed to be calm. She did not need chaos to feel real. She did not pain to feel alive. Outside, she found a small park, children playing freely, parents watching from benches. Juliet sat on the grass, watching a little girl scrape her knee, then stand back up, wiping the dirt and running again. And Juliet felt something shift inside her. She saw her younger self again, the one who learned to stay silent, the one who thought love meant enduring the storm, the one who believed she was not enough. Juliet closed her eyes, letting the sun warm her face, and she whispered to that younger version of herself, "You made it. You survived. You were never weak. You were just alone." When she opened her eyes, she pulled out her father's letter again, reading every word, not for the pain, but for the truth. She realized now that forgiveness was not for her father or her mother. Forgiveness was the key she needed to unlock the life waiting beyond the hurt that shaped her. She stood up slowly, feeling the ground steady beneath her feet. She walked toward the edge of the park, where the road split into two paths, one leading back toward the bus station, the other leading deeper into the little town, toward new people, new chances, new beginnings. Juliet looked at both roads, and she understood the difference. One road meant survival. The other meant living. And for the first time in her life, she chose living. She stepped onto the new path, carrying nothing but her small bag, her father's letter, and a heart finally ready to grow. Her past was behind her, her future was open, and she walked forward, not as the broken girl from the old house, but as Juliet, the girl who finally learned she was enough. Juliet walked deeper into the town, feeling each step like a quiet promise she had never been brave enough to make before. The sun was lowering, spilling a soft golden light across the street, and she followed it as if it was guiding her towards something she could finally call her own. She passed a small bookstore, its windows warm and glowing, and something about it pulled her inside, not because she needed a book, but because she needed a place that felt gentle. The bell above the door rang softly, and an older man looked up from behind the counter with eyes that held years of stories. He did not ask where she came from. He did not ask why she looked tired. He simply nodded and said, "Welcome," in a voice steady like a calm river. Juliet wandered between the shelves, running her fingers lightly over the spines of books. Stories of people who fought their own battles, people who survived what others never saw, people who found strength in places they thought were empty. She saw herself in those silent stories, and for the first time, she felt she was not strange or broken. She was just human like everyone else. The old man walked over and handed her a thin book, saying, "This one helped a lot of people when they needed something to lean on." Juliet looked at the cover, not recognizing the title, but feeling something familiar in the simplicity of it. She asked softly, "Why did you think I needed it?" And the man replied, "Because sometimes the people who walk the quietest carry the heaviest things." Juliet held the book close and felt her chest tighten with a truth she rarely let herself feel. She whispered, "Thank you," and he nodded like he understood without needing a single detail. Outside, the sky turned a deep, calm blue as evening settled. Juliet sat on a bench near the bookstore, breathing in the cool air, watching people hurry home from work, families gathering for dinner, laughter drifting from open windows, and she realized something she had never allowed herself to realize before. Healing did not always happen in big, dramatic moments. Sometimes it was in warm tea, or a stranger's kindness, or the silence of a bookstore. Sometimes healing was simply choosing not to walk back to the life that hurt you. She opened her father's letter again, reading the words slowly, letting them settle, not as wounds, but as closure. She whispered, "I forgive you, not because you stayed, but because I deserve peace." She closed the letter and placed it inside the book like it belonged there, holding her past inside a story that no longer controlled her. Juliet stood up, walking toward a small hill behind the town where the view opened wide. She climbed slowly, the grass brushing against her legs, the air cool and honest. She reached the top and looked out over the quiet world below, lights flickering like tiny hopes, and she understood that she did not escape her life. She rebuilt it. She did not run from pain. She walked toward herself. She placed her hand over her heart, feeling it beat steady, strong, alive. She knew she would still feel lonely sometimes. She knew the memories would sometimes return. She knew healing was not a straight line, but she also knew she was no longer trapped. She was choosing her life piece by breath. She whispered into the open sky, "I am free." And for the first time, those words felt real. They belonged to her, to Juliet, the girl who once lived in fear, the girl who walked away, the girl who found her own beginning in a quiet town full of kindness. She looked ahead at the fading horizon and stepped forward into her new life, the past behind her, the future open, the story hers, and the story finally complete.